The topic of this mini lecture is going to be about the history of astronomy. And in particular, in this one, we're going to be talking mostly about ancient astronomy. Now, we're going to hit upon a lot of history of astronomy throughout the semester, but here we're going to talk about a few specific things that I think are important for setting the scene of astronomy before we really get going with the rest of the semester. Now, I'm going to warn you that a lot of my slides, maybe you've already noticed, have a lot of words on them. Those are really, for me, notes for me so that I can remember what I need to talk about and things that I want to say. You can always freeze the frame and take down notes from there. You have all of these lecture slides always that I have available to you too. So you can use them however you see fit as additional resources to your textbook and to your videos. So we're going to start our story of the history of astronomy in ancient Babylonia. So there have been observations from ancient Babylonia of astronomical events found inscribed on clay tablets in cuneiform. These date all the way back to 3,500 BC. And this one in particular is talking about Halley's Comet, which still comes through our solar system every so often. And the ancient Babylonians developed a mythology and religion influenced by the position of astronomical objects in the sky. They are not alone. Many, many cultures, nearly every single culture has done the same thing throughout history. Now, Babylonian astronomy was the first successful attempt at giving a refined mathematical description of astronomical phenomena, which is what we strive to do in astronomy still today. The ancient Egyptians really utilized astronomy too. Astronomy in particular played a role in fixing the dates of their religious festivals and determining hours of the night. It also played an important role for them in knowing when they need to plant their crops, when the Nile would be flooding, for instance. And it's thought that the ancient Egyptian pyramids are aligned with astronomical objects. Some maybe with the position of the sun in the sky on a particular date, and some with Thuban. Thuban was the North Pole star in the time of the ancient Egyptians, about 5,000 years ago. And for ancient Egyptians, the rising of Sirius, which is the brightest star in our night sky, was important in fixing their yearly calendar. And the rising of Sirius was also an indication of when the Nile would flood, which was, of course, very important for them and their society. They were aware that the year was about 365 days, and they also used sundials to tell time. Here's an example of a sundial. So there would have been a pole, maybe a wooden stake that fits right in here, and set it flat on the ground, and the sun's rays will strike on that pole in the ground, and the shadow that the sun's rays cast would then align with these lines here, and they could be used to tell the time, because as the sun moves through the sky during the day, it changes its position, which means it also changes the direction of shadows that you see. The ancient Chinese also paid very close attention to astronomical objects. As dynasties would rise and fall throughout their culture, astronomers and astrologers would often prepare new calendars for that new dynasty. And the ancient Chinese astronomers also took special note of what they called guest stars. These are objects that would appear for brief periods of time, only temporarily, and then they would disappear again. Some of those in particular were comets, but some were also supernova, explosions of massive stars at the end of their lifetimes. And here's an example of one guest star that we know ancient Chinese astronomers wrote about. And that guest star was the Crab Nebula. Here's a picture of the Crab Nebula. We also did a problem on the Crab Nebula already. And as these dynasties would rise and fall, the astronomers and astrologers would also prepare new star maps for that dynasty. And here are some examples of star charts for different dynasties. And so to use a star chart, we see it's on this flat piece of paper here, but essentially what you would do is take that piece of paper and then you would hold it up above you, okay? And then holding it up above you is essentially taking those stars and mapping them onto the celestial sphere above you. In Central America and Mexico, the Mayan and Aztec cultures had a really close tie with the sky as well. Here, this is called the Caracol Observatory at Chichen Itza, and it was aligned with the path of Venus. Venus was special to them, and it's also aligned with the sunrise of the summer solstice and the sunset of the winter solstice. We'll talk more about what solstices mean, but those are essentially the beginning. The solstice is like the beginning of winter and the beginning of summer. The Aztecs and the Mayans also had pretty intricate calendars, sort of like this, and they were also based on the position of objects in the sky to help them keep track of time. A really big theme here is that our sky is a natural clock. And ancient people latched onto that, and they used that to help them understand how time progresses. You might have heard of Stonehenge in England, and it's one of many great stone circles built for the purpose of tracking the sun and the moon. And this Stonehenge in particular, they think dates back as far as 2800 BC. I lived in England for a couple of years, and I got to visit Stonehenge myself. And you know, you hear about Stonehenge all of your life, then you go visit it and you're sort of like, oh, okay, that's it. It's kind of like going to visit the White House. If you've ever been able to see the White House and you get to see it for the first time, it's maybe not as grand as you thought, but to ancient people, Stonehenge was a very important part of their culture and perhaps their religion. So here we have the Stonehenge, looking at it from a particular viewpoint, and on the summer and winter solstices, the sun peeks through in between some of these stones here. And this picture in particular was taken at Stonehenge on the winter solstice. And you can tell it is the winter solstice because there are a few people in here wearing some fuzzy winter hats. Stonehenge is still a very important part of British heritage and British culture. It's a protected British heritage site, and parties happen there every year on the summer and winter solstices. And within the Indian culture, astronomy was often tied to astrology. And here is something called the Jantar Mantar complex in Jaipur, India, which I actually got to visit a few years ago for a conference that I was speaking at in India. So it's a collection of 19 astronomical instruments. This one was completed fairly recently, actually in 1734, compared to Stonehenge, I guess. And they were naked eye instruments. Telescopes were invented by this time, but the state-of-the-art equipment needed for telescopes was hard to get to India. And so they constructed a bunch of these really interesting devices that they could use to do naked eye astronomy pretty well. Here, for example, is a sundial. It is in fact the world's largest stone sundial, standing at 88 feet tall or 27 meters. And so this piece here acts as the like the pole in a sundial, and the shadow that the sun's rays make when it strikes this end of this sundial here puts a shadow on this curved piece right here. And so you can see that you actually can walk around and get down into some of these objects to use them for naked eye observing. Seafaring cultures also used the position of astronomical objects in the sky at night and in the day to help them navigate. Way before we had GPS devices, way before we had compasses, you could use the sky as a clock. You can use the sky as a way to find direction. And in particular, the Polynesian culture did this. Polynesia is made up of more than 1,000 islands scattered over Central and Southern Pacific Ocean. Also, native Hawaiians used pretty much a similar method here. That's what I'm going to explain. So this is a way that the Polynesians divided up their sky. the important thing that really makes their wayfinding work by the stars is that they are pretty close to the equator. And so when you're near the equator, stars are going to rise almost 100 degrees from where they set. So here, when a star rises at a specific point on the horizon, let's say over here, they would know that that star is going to set exactly or near the same quadrant 180 degrees behind them. So if they're standing one direction and they see a star rise in front of them, they know that 12 hours later, that star is going to be setting directly behind them. We briefly hit upon this when I talked about the specific constellations for different dynasties in Chinese culture, but we also find that throughout different cultures in the world, that all of them, or the majority of them, are looking up into the night sky and they're picking out patterns that the stars make in the sky. They're creating their own set of constellations and their own stories, folklore that go along with those constellations to help them make sense of the world around them. And it's kind of interesting because a lot of them tend to pick out similar shapes. And so what I'm going to have you do is go to a website that I've linked in Canvas, and you'll find 3 star maps for 3 different indigenous tribes of North America, and you're going to observe them and compare and contrast them to see what's similar and what's different among the constellations that they created within their culture.